think as the two chair in a way, the working group chair and the RGC chairman make clear, I think there has been a lot of thinking and consultation on this review. And I think the point Edward just made that we're here to serve the research community is the important one. We have scheduled 1 hour for Q&A. I know many of you are busy, but we'll try to conclude that within an hour. I know there's a wide range of issues, number of recommendations. Please feel free to raise questions. We also have our chairman here and also, yes, Linda.
Thanks, Chair and colleagues. Linda Lee from City University of Hong Kong. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate the working group and for a very good report and also engaging with the consultant. And I'm glad to hear many of the recommendations, and I'm equally glad to hear that the LegCo has approved of the 20 billion new funding for us. I'd like to raise, actually, because I have no disagreement with the recommendations, so I look forward to them being addressed and executed, okay, including more technical issues about electronic system, okay, because I think many of us who has submitted applications in the past, suffer from it quite a bit. One additional point I'd like to raise for this community and the RGC and UGC to consider is that on the one hand, I think Hong Kong SARG has increased substantially our research funding, which is a welcome news. On the other hand, well, not on the other hand, at the same time, okay, at the same time, we're also equally glad that our research funding from mainland China will be or has been, okay, starting to become more accessible to researchers in Hong Kong, and including not only the amount but also the ease of using the resources. But I, as a social scientist, okay, I'm from political science. I noticed that most of these additional resources make available to Hong Kong researchers are available to my science and engineering colleagues. Social scientists benefit a little bit, okay, especially in the area of management. But majority of us are very difficult to get access, although personally, I did try, okay, to apply for mainland schemes, but I think all of you know, okay, the differences and in fact, the state key labs, okay, which are the first batch of research clusters which can benefit from this so-called funding can come across the river, the Shenzhen River, or applies to the science and engineering fields. So I would like request, okay, our UGC and RGC as you are the most important funding authorities for Hong Kong researchers to take account of this, because for some of us, especially in the humanities and social science, including the law and business, okay, we continue to be almost solely reliant on Hong Kong funding. So especially I take note of one of the recommendations that you would look at the balance of an allocation of a budget across different panels. I think this is a very important background to be taken note of. Thank you.
Okay, so let me try to address some of the your questions. I think here, I think in terms of the funding in Hong Kong regarding humanities and social sciences, we do not have any prejudice on any area. In fact, all the areas are treated equally important in terms of funding. You can actually find this from the results of the funding. Now, you may say that, well, the success rate in social science and humanities may be lower, and the highest is physical sciences. But if you look at the results of the evaluations, I think we are based on entirely on criterion referencing, meaning that we look at the score, or at least the rating provided by the reviewers and the panel members. For those reviews that have received a 5, they almost universally will be funded. 4.5 is mostly funded. 4 will be on the borderline and require more discussion. So in the sense that we are using some absolute score in terms of criteria, in terms of funding, and humanities and social sciences are treated in the same way as science and engineering and medicine. Now, we cannot speak more about what the funding from mainland because it is usually directed by certain agencies. For example, most is on science and engineering and technology. There are other sources of funding that may be more social science related, and that may be at the Shenzhen level or the Guangdong government level. And that requires us to work with them closely in getting getting that money available, making them available to Hong Kong. So we would work, I think the UGC and RGC would work very hard with the mainland government to make sure that different sources of funding will be made available for researchers in Hong Kong. Anything to add?
Yes, please.
My name is Mana Yong from the Open University of Hong Kong, and I used to work in the University of Hong Kong, and then I moved from the Self-Finance Institute. Then I found that it is quite different to apply funding from the Self-Finance Institutes and also from the UGC-funded institutions. And with an increasing amount of funding resources, would there be equally increasing in funding in the self-funded institutions? And also, would there be any schemes that support the early career scheme for the researchers, young researchers in the self-finance institutes? Thank you.
In the self-financing degree institutions, we have the 3 different schemes, the faculty development scheme, inter-institutional development scheme, and the institutional development schemes. Now, the amount of money that we have allocated initially were like $200 million per year or $150 million per year. But there was the demand for that spending is low. And right now, the success rate of funding for the self-financing degree institution, I would say, is probably as high as those that in the UGC-funded institutions. We need to encourage more submissions or applications from those institutions. I think that for early career scheme, the panel make provision. There is not a separate ECS scheme in the FDS, but if you indicate that in your submission, usually you would be given due considerations. There is a lot of leeways in terms of funding, and we try to make the funding in the self-financing applications as lenient as possible. In a way, we try to encourage people to apply for funding and try to fund as much as possible in those schemes. I think that some people are agreeing with me. So you can see that I think the evaluation there, we're much more lenient in terms of funding.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. If I understand correctly, the idea of the research impact will in the future be being considered as a funding criteria. I would like to understand more about what kind of impact you are referring to and how to measure it. Thanks.
Okay, for the Research Impact Fund, that was set up a year ago. And it was very successful. We funded 30 of those proposals. In a way that we understand, it is difficult to measure impact when you submit a proposal because it's all based on research that has not been done. However, in the application process, we request the PIs to document the process, meaning that you need to describe the pathway to impact. How would you materialize, or how would you effectively carry out the research so that there will be impact at the end. It is more based on impact that would be hypothetical, that you think that there will be impact, but at least you have thought about the process and have documented the process in your proposal. So this is something that we look for in the Research Impact Fund, to document the process so that at the end you can actually indicate whether you are successful or not. Now, we also understand that impact may not be done in 3 years in the duration of the proposal, and therefore it may be a longer term process that even after the research has been completed, that there is an ongoing process to make sure that the impact would happen. Now, we have also, in the last RGC meeting, the Council has agreed that in the future for all GRF, ECS, in fact, all the ERGs except for conference grants, TRS and AOE, we would be asking for the PIs to document the pathway to impact, similar to the Research Impact Fund. We think that this is a very useful process for the researchers to think early, to think about how impact could be materialized at the end, and to document that in your research submissions.
As I understand, the Research Impact Fund is a separate fund, so it's separately funded and specifically for that purpose. So it's not merged with the other GRF and so on.
The Research Impact Fund is a separate scheme. I think in the coming year, we plan to allocate $75 million for funding. Those are for medium-scale projects, like on the order of $15 million or less, together with, I think, 30% matching from the institutions. The other schemes, like the GRF and the ERGs, do not require matching. So the Research Impact Fund is the first pilot exercise that we set up to fund medium-scale projects that would eventually lead to impact, or at least with a documented pathway to impact.
For those of you who are from the UGC sector, I think you're also aware that the RAE now has an impact component in the RAE 2020. I think the broader trend is a wider recognition of such impact in general for our research community.
Hi, good afternoon. Kathleen Ahrens, Hong Kong Polytechnic. Thank you very much for your presentation today. I appreciate all the information you've brought us in this very comprehensive report. I have 3 questions. The first question refers to what Professor Linda Land said in relation to CityU when she's talking about political science. And you were talking about how the physicists, it was criterion reference for the results. The physicists is all criterion reference, and they have the highest level of funding because they all have 5s, and so they get the most funding. They get about 50% are funded for physicists. Physics is a very narrow field, and us on the outside of physics looking in, look at that and say, that's because they all know each other and they want to support each other and they all give each other 5s. But in other panels, like, well, first, related to criterion reference, the other thing is you can see those results. You can see, you have access to that information, and that's something that came out in the report but wasn't really mentioned in the presentation, is that there's an issue of accessibility or transparency that we don't get to see. So, for example, my panel is linguistics and psychology. All I can see coming out of linguistics and psychology is that in terms of results, if we look at the departments that are funded, about 80% come from social science or psychology departments, and less than 20% come from linguistics or English departments. That's all I can see, but I don't know the numbers going in. I don't know, maybe there was a lot more people applying from psychology, so that's the reason for the discrepancy in the funding. So my first point is, even though the issue of transparency was mentioned in the report, it wasn't really emphasized here, and I think that's something all of us would really like to see. The accountability, and so we know what's going on, The second point, about the funds that have multiple groups competing for funding. So again, I mentioned linguistics and psychology because that's my panel and that's what I'm most familiar with. But I remember about a year ago when you were here soliciting information from us, this was also related to, this was also brought up by other members of other panels who have these sort of competing groups, humanities and arts or biology and medicine. I'm not sure about the sciences, but they have competing groups funding for it. And so when you do have these competing groups funding for it, we would like to have more transparency about the balance of the people on the funding committees, the results of the funding, and what these panels are looking for. I think this is an ongoing issue in the scheme. The last point is this. This unprofessional comments from reviewers. So, unprofessional. So, we understand, I read this report and we discussed this at great length when you came and sought views from us. I understand it's very hard to go back and relitigate the results of a panel review. And I know you're going to do it for the TRS scheme, and I think that's great. My suggestion, though, is that there is a mechanism, and a mechanism maybe via the, I don't know how, online or via the university, if there's been someone who made unprofessional comments in the review, that we be allowed to report that to the UGC, to the RGC, not to litigate the case, because we understand it's very difficult, so many proposals, et cetera. But as DRC chair for my department, people show me the reviewers' comments. Usually you get, five, wonderful, lots of good, ideas, suggestions, then you get one person who has a 2. And that person who has a 2 says things like, I couldn't be bothered to read this report because it doesn't make any sense. Why was that included and why was that sent back? Why didn't the panel chair say, okay, this person didn't have time to read the report, it was not interested, let me get another reviewer. There are instances like that that's why I said unprofessional. Not that they disagree or they think we could explain better, those are all very reasonable comments, I completely understand. But there are instances where there are remarks made, sometimes personal towards the reviewer or towards the project, that are extremely unprofessional. I'd like to be allowed to bring that to RGC's attention for your further information, maybe for the panel chair's further information or someone else's further information for the future. Thank you.
Edward, do you want to comment on that one?
First of all, there is a mechanism where the RGC blacklists certain reviewers and not use them again on our database. That comes from panel chairs and panel members who find those reviews not useful or particularly biased or particularly out of line. Now, we do not right now have a mechanism where the applicants, or successful or not, report back to the RGC certain issues. I think I don't think those would be very large numbers. I think RGC would be happy to receive from you comments that certain reviews are not professional and so on. And we may or may not decide to blacklist that reviewer, but we'll certainly let the panel chair know about it. Maybe that will satisfy what you just mentioned.
Well, being merely an observer in some of these panel meetings, my observation actually is that if there were unprofessional comments of this kind, usually the conveners would really make some comments, and basically most panel members would not be very sympathetic to such kind of comments. There are some good conversations on some of those issues, and I think a lot of the conversations on the specific reviews do, at least for me as an observer, indicate that the panel members take these sort of comments quite seriously, and if I may use the word, that if these are really not reasonable comments, I think they are always being dismissed. So most of these have been managed at the panel level, and I must say that I haven't been to every panel every time, but almost every case there are pretty good, vigorous discussions, particularly if there are major differences from the reviews coming in.
I'd like to address your other comment in terms of like, you have made one interesting point that physical sciences people all support each other, that they are good friends of each other, and they all give each other 5s in the reviews. And humanity and social sciences all put down each other's and put down the reviews to be 1 or 2. I think there could be another explanation in the sense that may be one possible explanation. The other possible explanation is that the research in certain area may be of high quality on an international basis. And therefore, when we send the proposal out to reviewers, they all feel that it is of international high quality. So we cannot rule out that reason and saying that they are all friends that are looking for, we all send the proposals to friends, and therefore they all give them 5s. So it is possible that in certain areas in Hong Kong, we have strengths, and those are all excellent research and was rated the best internationally. Now, the other point that you raised in terms of like making things more transparent in terms of statistics, we are working on that. We are trying to get the information documented so that we can release them on the website, like how many proposals coming in certain areas, how many got funded in certain areas, and so on. So we will try to make that information available in the future. The third point that you mentioned in terms of unprofessional behavior of reviewers, I think that this is a problem that we know all along. And as Edward mentioned, we try to blacklist certain reviewers who made unprofessional comments. Secondly, I think that in terms of the comments made by reviewers, we in panels are not just doing a simple average and then make a decision based on the average. All the review reports are read by the readers, and they are discussed in the panel meetings. If there are certain reports that are unprofessional, they will be singled out for discussion. And that is, at least that is what we have requested the chairs of panel meetings to do. Now, if they are not doing that, then you need to report to us, and we want to make sure that that would happen, that there is ample time for discussion of reports that are not along the line or non-professional. Another point is that we are in the process, the Secretariat has been discussing with me how to overhaul the reviewer database, because that database is actually accumulated over time and over many years. And that database may not be totally accurate because, like, suppose somebody entered a name 5 years ago and they changed their areas to some other areas. The database does not reflect that. So there is a process how to keep track of that database on an updated basis, on an annual and frequent basis, so that we know exactly what the reviewer is interested in reviewing, how many proposals they are interested to review, and whether they do good reports or not so good reports. So we need to collect that information more frequently and on an updated basis. This is something that we, the Secretariat has been discussing with me to how to engage a consultant so that we can redesign the whole reviewer database from scratch so that it can be kept updated all the time.
I frequently complain issue. It's about the RGC ECS review is the bias. You know, I think the individual quality of the individual review has been said enough. I'm not going to repeat it. But there's also perceived so-called discipline bias within a panel. You know, as you know, we have limited number of panels. Some panel consists of a very broad group. So they're being accused on the panel are more in favor of a certain field versus another field. I think some sort of a transparency will help on this issue.
I certainly agree that we need to provide more transparency in terms of like success rate, funding by areas, and so on. But in every council meeting in June when we discuss the GRF and the ECS, we asked the panel chairs to report any peculiar, any bias or anything that happens in the meeting, whether they see any particular areas of concern that we need to address to. And in fact, this is a year ago, or a year before that. This was always done verbally, meaning that it was every panel chair would come to the meeting and report their findings, and then they may be forgotten, and then we try to record something and then try to follow up. But that was not done systematically. Now, starting this year, we are asking the panel chairs to write up their report before the meeting, so that we now have a documented process of what has been discussed in the panel meeting. Secondly, we are developing a policies and procedures for the panels, meaning that there will be a documented process. In fact, each year, when there are new issues that were discovered, we would incorporate them into a policy and procedure handbook, so that in the future, when panel chairs change, when there are new panel members, they would have something to hold in their hands to read about what had been discussed in the past. So this is a new procedure that we have incorporated this year, a new policies and procedure handbook for each panel. All right, this will be panel specific because we know that HSS panel will be very different from the engineering panel and from the biology and medicine panel. So this will be done on a panel specific basis.
I would like to know, with the new input of $20 million, would that imply that the length of funding application could be longer? Because at the moment, it's usually just 3 or maybe occasional 5 years. With the new influx of money, would there be any possibility that it could be extended to a longer duration?
Okay, so I think that the discussion in the research group at the UGC as well as the RGC Council meeting is that for that $20 billion, one of the important components is to increase the funding amount of the GRF and the ECS by 33%. So we do not plan to increase the success rate of funding, meaning that they would keep the same success rate as something on the average of 35%. So it means that the funding amount will be increased by 33%. Whether that will translate into longer duration is up to the PIs. That is like you have 33% more money, you can spend more money each year because many people complain that there is not enough money to spend in each year. So in a way that it will be up to you to propose a 3-year project or a 4-year project to be longer, to spend more money. So this will be up to the individual to propose. The other money will be coming into, for example, like TRS would have an increase. The collaborative research funding, we plan to increase from the current $110 million to $175 million. Again, that will translate into possibly higher success rate for the CRF, because the CRF goes up to around $10 million. And currently, the success rate is rather low in the CRF. So that could translate into a higher success rate for the CRF. So for various schemes, it all depends. But the good news is that all the funding schemes would have increased amount of funding.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Sam from HKBU SCE, the self-financing arm. I have one question regarding a follow-up question of Catherine of PolyU. Sometimes colleagues come up with, to us with the assessment result from the FDS scheme. So they may have maybe 2 to 5 reviewers reviewing their proposal. And some come to us with 4 out of 5, very good, excellent. And only 1 out of the 5 saying that, oh, not good enough. And eventually, he or she couldn't get the funding. To me, it would be nice if UGC could provide some kind of more information to convince the FDS applicant, saying that, oh, there's some reason, some good reason that your proposal is not funded. Sometimes colleagues may be quite confused and a bit frustrated, given that 4 out of 5 reviewers give a thumb up, while 1 of the 5 go to other side of the review. This is just one suggestion. The other thing is when we take a look of the funding schemes available for the self-financing institution, we are actually very grateful to have the IDS, IIDS, and the FDS available for us. But sometimes when we heard about the research impact scheme or other fellowship scheme, joint research scheme, there are a lot more, a wider range of funding available for the UGC colleagues as compared to the self-financing colleagues. I was wondering if UGC may consider in future, in the longer run, to also open up some more schemes for the self-financing colleagues. Thank you.
I can try to address the FDS because I'm also in the panel and attended some of the meetings. Now, for the report, I think you are right that maybe sometimes you receive 4 positive reports and 1 negative report and the proposal is not funded. But I think you need to understand that the decision is not based on a simple mathematical average. The reviewers, the comments are taken into account holistically. The panels would discuss the proposal, and then especially when you have 4 reports that are positive and 1 that is negative and the proposal is not funded, that requires more deliberations because the proposal will be higher up in the list to be funded. And they require more discussion at the panel meeting. But I agree with you that a document, some documentations from the readers will be very helpful as to explain why the proposal is not funded. We are doing that for example, for the joint research scheme with the NSFC in China. The panel members and the readers have to document for example, on a green form that to explain why a proposal is not funded because of positive reports. Secondly, I think you talk about like there are many possible schemes in the UGC and the self-financing degree institution would also like to participate. But I'd like to call on you that that there is a new scheme in the IDS that was set up last year, and this was called a Collaborative Research Funding Scheme. Now, in the past, when we had the IDS, it was only used for supporting infrastructures of institutions. You can use that to buy computers, library, books, set up offices. But there are so many books you can buy and so many computers you can buy. At some point in time, the computers are just wasting electricity and you don't want to buy them anymore. So therefore, starting from last year, we set up a new scheme along with the IDS that allows collaborations, self-financing institutions to work together, collaborate to develop larger scale proposals. So this scheme now encompasses all the other schemes that you can see in the UGC, in the RGC, like the CRF and the Research Impact Fund. I think so. I would like you to look at that possibility because the funding there is as good as although we don't call it Research Impact Fund. Research Impact Fund is not even as good as that because that requires 30% funding matching. This Collaborative Research Fund doesn't require matching. So in the sense that you need to look at that closely, and there are now good opportunities also for the self-financing degree institutions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Vivian Zhang from the Chinese University. I have 3 questions. First is about the number of reviewers. I see that we can have from 2 to 6 reviewers. But we know that the panel is often looking for negative comments from the reviewers. So the more reviewers you get, the more likely you get negative comments and a lower grade. So how does the panel balance the number of reviewers? So that's my first question. Second is about resubmission. We see that resubmitted proposals may not go to the same reviewers. So what's the purpose of asking us to respond to the first round of reviewers? This my own experience. Okay, last time I got some comments and then I tried to respond. But then this round I got totally different reviewers who have very different opinions. So in this case, how do you really take care of this kind of resubmission issue? That's my second question. My last question is about censorship. Because I'm in political science, and I see that quite some politically sensitive topics get screened out. Some sources told me that these topics are regarded as too sensitive and not suitable for being carried out at current time. So I just wonder if there is such kind of censorship, and how does the panel really deal with politically sensitive topics? Yeah, thank you.
I answer the first two. As far as having how many numbers of reviews, is somewhat outside the control of the RGC, because each reader is supposed to ask for reviews from at least 5 people. And sometimes if not enough reviews come back, then the secretary will remind the reader to ask for some more. So the few number of reviews is basically because we cannot get that many reviews. It's not because we deliberately do not get. So I guess it's somewhat luck that you get more reviews or or fewer reviews. On the other hand, I've been on as a panel chair before, and I've been on panel and reviews before. I do not believe that the more reviews you get, the more negative the reviews get. In fact, chances of diluting a negative review is much better if you have more reviews. But anyway, that remains to be seen. Regarding, what was the second question? Resubmission. Oh, resubmissions, yeah. The resubmission part, the response, actually is something I think to help the applicants, because there must be some parts of your first application that was not clear or not explained fully, or maybe you didn't have certain preliminary results or did not address certain issues that's out there already. And so as people look at resubmissions, they basically, most of the time they are satisfied that your response to the reviewers to the first time is quite good enough. And of course, different reviewers do look at different aspects because of personal taste and so on, and expertise. So it's certainly possible for another set of reviewers to raise different questions. But I think those response to the first set of reviews are generally quite helpful. I find that helpful in the AOE schemes and the TRS schemes, particularly when larger issues are being addressed.
Yeah. Can I address the third question that you raised? I'm not too sure how your understanding of the operation, because basically we don't screen proposals, right? These go to the panels, and these are usually, well, not usually, they're all leading experts in the field, a large number of international members with no local prejudice one way or the other. So they're really judged on the merit. Maybe there could be debates and arguments on exactly, what the reviewers have to say. But being the secretariat in managing the applications, we don't screen whatever topics. It's really up to the panels who would make the decisions on funding support.
At least up to now, we have not seen any examples of politicals or any censorship on the research topics being investigated. So at this point, we haven't seen any examples that is happening. It's all based on academic merit in the evaluation process.
Hello. Michael Siu from PolyU School of Design. I am the panel member of the RGC sub-panel members of Humanities before for the full 2 terms, and then stepped down for several years. I just want to say something about the review process. I understand, first of all, I must appreciate that more funding is given to us, okay? But of course, I understand the majority may be unhappy about the result because most of the people fail in the review, okay? I understand this real fact. But one point I want to raise is that nowadays a review process something like this, some defects or some deficiency, let me say in this way, that nowadays many of the reviewers we observe, my observation, is not the people really good qualified to review. It's the people willing to review. As a reader, we send out, we found the best one, but they don't want to review. But we find out, and then what we can make, we select, we tune down and find somebody or someone they mentioned there in the area. Then we ask them, this one willing to review, then he review. So things we bring out in the result, so things I observe, my very humble observation is that, first of all, such as why I raise this question, I want to know, because I work in school design, it's a very small area. Honestly, in the humanities panel for the past 5 years, we don't have one person in the design area. Honestly. The second is that the reader, I understand, okay, you can say that readers should not be exactly the area they do it, but the panel member will send it out to find out expert. That's very good. But critical point is that when we go back to the panel, who is the person qualified to say about the reviews is a key point. In the panel, even one expert in the area, but most of the time, like school design in PolyU. If we have a proposal in the panel, we cannot say one word about the panel, about the proposal. Is it? Then nobody can say anything. I want to raise one point is that, and suggestion that the people in the panel may not be qualified to review, to give some comments sometimes, okay? Then my suggestion is that how RGC, because this symposium, I want to raise this suggestion, how RGC can actively review the existing database and review who should be in the panel when discuss this kind of issues. I don't know the issue, maybe a lot of minor subjects, then how we do it. How we can find a better way. May not be like other countries, maybe we find a breakthrough way to find out how to do it. Then let us think that, honestly, I'm a chairperson in the area. I also feel that sometimes when I look at my colleagues, I really feel what they're talking about my colleagues' proposal, even they're not in the area. Honestly, I must honestly say, but not all, but it's a thing, okay? Another question is that many years ago, RGC want to raise something about the breakthrough research and high-risk research. And then up to now, is it any plan for in the future about this one? It's a lot related to my first question. I want to raise a second question about this one. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of, I think that the question that you raised was in terms of the lack of qualified panel members in the panel to evaluate a proposal. I think that sometimes it happens because in a way that depending on the number of proposals in a particular area, if the number is very small, we may not be able to engage a panel member for every possible discipline and every possible area. So in a way, it is important for the panel chair to recruit generalists, meaning that at least a particular panel member who can cover a multitude of areas, or at least several areas that are within the understanding of the panel chair. The panel chair or the panel member is there. The reader would then go out to find qualified reviewers to review the proposal. The readers, we rely on the readers at least to understand the reports coming in. They do not have to be exactly in the same area as the proposal, but the reviewers must be in the same area, must be qualified reviewers. So as I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of upgrading our reviewer database. Hopefully that problem could be solved in in due time. I think that is not an easy to solve issue, because reviewers change their career, change their areas of interest, and we need to keep updating their areas of interest all the time, and whether they are good reviewers or not. The other question you mentioned was the high risk proposal. In a way that we do not have a specific area called high risk, because I don't, like when you talk about high risk, it could be over all possible disciplines, and therefore there is maybe also a high chance of failures or rejection in the high risk proposal. So in the sense that when you submit proposals to any area, research impact fund, TRS, or CRF, you are welcome to submit high risk proposals and develop a good proposal. In the panel meetings, we also discuss, for example, in the TRS and the AOE, I saw that the panel members say, this is a high-risk proposal. This, the chance for success is not high, but the payoff could also be high. That is, there could be very high payoff for certain proposals, and that proposal was funded. So in the sense that it is not because that the regular schemes do not consider high-risk proposals. In fact, all the schemes we welcome high-risk proposals, but high-risk proposals are more difficult to write because and to convince reviewers that it will be successful.
Selina Chen from Xi'an University. I also would like to follow up on the reviewing process for self-financing institution. As you also mentioned that we have three types of three schemes. One is FDS, the other is IDS, and finally IIDS. For IDS, there are actually two types. One is IDS CRG, which is collaborative research grant, which is very similar to what you have with the UGC institutions. But the other type is IDS equipment grant. I think many of our colleagues in the self-financing institution also have the same complaint. We found that the reviewers do not know much about the scheme. As you all mentioned that these schemes support research by providing fundings to get books or buildings and infrastructures. So basically it's to facilitate research, but it does not mean that this grant will lead to research, will support research project. It may lead to research project later. However, many of us receive comments from reviewers saying that, what are your research projects? There's no mention of research project from this fund. So we have the feeling that the reviewers do not know what this type of grant is about, because most of them are from UGC institutions and they are very familiar with CRG and other research grants. To them, this is exotic. So we think that it would be nice if RGC could think of different ways to educate them, to let them know this is not to support research projects, but to build up infrastructure. So I know that the RGC seems to have some guidance note telling them what is this about, but sometimes during the interviews with those panel members, we also receive questions like they ask us, what are your research projects like? So we found that they don't seem to have read the guidance note. So I would be glad if RGC could come up with new strategies to educate reviewers the nature of different grants, especially those in the self-financing institution may have different games.
Let me address that. I think that we have gone through that review process because every year we hold a briefing meeting for the self-financing degree institutions. Now for the infrastructure grant, when you say that the panel during the interview asks you about what research you are doing, I think that when you ask for a piece of equipment, it's not like I just want a computer, I want some books, but what is the use of that equipment or the books? So in a way that an accompanying description is that what is the research that will be facilitated by that equipment? You need to describe that. That is, you cannot just say, I want a piece of equipment and this is my proposal. You need to describe in terms of the equipment, what research in your institution or in multiple institutions would be facilitated by that equipment? And how would this equipment make a difference to the research? Now, we understand that when you ask for equipment, you don't have the money for the research. What we have seen proposals that failed in the past was that they put together a proposal describing the equipment and the research from multiple PIs that seems to be totally unrelated. It's just proposals, multiple FDS proposals stapled together, calling them an equipment proposal or an infrastructure proposal, and that is certainly going to fail. So what I would recommend is that when you submit an IDS proposal, when you request for some equipment, make sure that that equipment will be used by multiple people. There is some description of the overarching research that could be facilitated by the equipment, not the exact project and the deliverables for the research, but what are the research projects that are ongoing in your institution that would be facilitated by the availability of this equipment that would otherwise not be done because of the lack of the equipment. I think the panel would like to know. It is not that they don't understand the guidance notes, but they are asking for the purpose of the equipment. What is the purpose of that equipment and how would that be used?
I'm S.Y. Leung from Faculty of Medicine, University of Hong Kong. So I would like to comment on this recommendation about specify the time commitments to various fund projects as well as for teaching and administrative duties in all applications. So, I mean, I'm not against if you are saying, you ask an investigator to put in, how much time they're spending on the project in RGC grant, that is very common for others. But to go as far as for every grant, we have to declare what our commitment to every project and our hours for any teaching and administrative duties is a little bit too far. I don't feel, this sort of time commitment is in general very useful anyway, because, I mean, you can see, people that are very diverse. Many successful researchers, they do hold a lot of grant, but they all deliver on the grant. So irrespective of how many they have. And there are people who have very little grant and they still don't deliver. So, I mean, the problem is if we are asked to put in all this detail, it becomes very, very administratively tedious and also subject the institution to, other issues. Say if if a researcher don't put in a correct time of teaching duty or don't put in correct time of administrative duty, what are we going to do? Are we going to audit? What is the responsibility of an institution? So I hope, we don't make these too bureaucratic, and also I hope that, this is mainly for the PI and not asking the co-I to put in their time as well. Because a lot of time you want to support your junior colleagues. So, if they ask you, if they're in your related field, they ask you to help them, you will of course help them. And then for a big team, you of course have many ways to help them. You have postdoc, you have RAP, you can support them in reagent and things like that. So if we ask a co-I to put in time commitment, how many hours are you going to put in? This is in units of hour per week. And then, so if I put in 0.1 hour, what does it mean to the reviewer? So I don't think that those are, very helpful comments. And also in general, this also linked to another question is what is the working hour, for an academic staff? Some people can work 24 hours a day, and some people, we know that some people sleep 4 hours a day, and the rest of the time they are all working. So there's such great variation that, I don't think this sort of exercise, you take it too seriously, is going to be very useful. And it creates problem for the administrator, in terms of the colleagues, in an institution who want to support our colleague and also, have a judiciary, responsibility. Yeah. And the other, so maybe I just.
Maybe we ask Professor Choi, because
millions of dollars. I think it's your responsibility to explain how you spend your time. right? I think that's very simple, right? And then, yes, COI has to declare your amount of time too. And then in the future, it's not going to waste your time because you have a central database. You just fill it once. So I'm insisting on that, really.
That's the rationale, I think, from Professor Choi. We are, yeah.
Okay, in terms of the amount of time, I think that, like, I agree that declaring, in a way, when you submit a proposal to maybe not the GRF or the ECS, but when you look at the TRS, theme-based AOE or the CRF, I think when the proposal was evaluated, the panel members want to know the commitment from the PI. How much commitment are you putting in? Because there could be disagreements at the end that when a project doesn't deliver, that you said, I did not promise any time, I did not promise to spend any time, and therefore I did not deliver. So in a way that when the PI submits a proposal, he or she needs to declare, is it 10% time, 20% time? 10% could be 4 hours, or 10% of 4 hours, or 10% could be 24 hours. But you need to declare the amount of effort, and that total effort doesn't add up to more than 100%, because you cannot work more than 100%, no matter how many hours of a day that you have. You can only work 24 hours a day. 100% of 24 hours is still 24 hours. It cannot be 110% of 24 hours. So in a way that we are asking people to clearly specify the commitment. Now for the co-I, it may not make too much sense, but the co-PI, because they are actually drawing resources from the grant, the co-PIs need to declare.
Well, we are running out of time. I certainly hope that our speakers have clarified some of these issues that you have in mind. I'm sure this is still an ongoing issue about how much information, how well we can communicate all the issues, and some of these are developing. I can see that one of the really challenging issues, the reviewers, we are definitely aware of that issue, and as Ben suggested, this is something that now we are looking at. It's very challenging not only for you, it's challenging for the Secretariat, because we have to reach out and ensure there are adequate number of reviewers, panel members, panel chair. These are a big issue for all of us, actually. So that's why we are now trying to look at it and see what we could do. And there are a number of other issues raised, and some of those issues are issues that we're definitely taking back. There are procedures that, as our two speakers have explained, that we actually are now trying to develop to address some of those issues. I'm sure there are other new issues that would pop up, and we'll definitely look at that, and hopefully with the implementation of some of the recommendations, we could move things forward and allow more direct communications between the research community and the RGC. Now, let me invite you to thank our two speakers, Professor Ben Wong and Professor Edward Young, for their presentations and clarification. Thank you. And thank you for joining us this afternoon.